Welcome to the BigFix Integration with ServiceNow, a step-by-step instructions for integrating ServiceNow with BigFix. This was the same class or the same session that was done at the IBM BigFix Mastery class in Orlando in 2019. So my name is Dan Powers. We were lucky enough to get invited by the IBM folks, Dan Paquette, Mike Stone and company, to come in and offer some integration capabilities inside of BigFix with ServiceNow. So at the Mastery class, we just did throw up an agenda. So I'm going to repeat everything we did at the Mastery class. We wanted to do a quick overview of the architecture for those folks that may be not that familiar with ServiceNow and how everything works, just to put in your head what's going on. And then we kind of ran through a hands-on class with labs. That's what this video is. We also, hopefully, if you're watching this video, you also pulled down the lab guidebook that was given out at the BigFix Mastery class that IBM had put on. And basically what we did is we went over some best practices inside of ServiceNow. We built a table to store our BigFix data inside of ServiceNow. We created the REST connection between BigFix and ServiceNow. We leveraged or show you how to use the JavaScript debugger. And then we began creating a scoped application inside of the ServiceNow Studio. And then we used that data into ServiceNow. We did a little bit of a deeper dive. And at the end, we were just showing you what is possible if you actually do a complete integration of BigFix into ServiceNow, and it could look something like this. Champion has been doing this for a while, and we do have a pre-built application inside of ServiceNow to work with BigFix. It's great for reporting your data, great for augmenting ServiceNow discovery, and of course you can do two-way communication. So for example, creating a whole patching series, having the ticket get created, get approved by your cab representatives, and once it gets authorized, it will actually call back to BigFix, create that baseline, assign the computers to it, run it, and keep status of it. So a lot of really cool things you could do if you keep following along with some of these steps we're going to show you today. Again, this is just going to be a simple, quick integration, but we should be able to get you going. So again, real quick, the architecture of ServiceNow is, of course, a SaaS-based application where your database, your CMDB, exists inside of ServiceNow. And to talk to anything that you want to work with on site, you go through what ServiceNow calls their mid server. So you have that communication securely done from the cloud to the mid server, which is located on premise at the client site. And then from that mid server, we're obviously talking to BigFix over the RESTful API on 52.3.11. And here we're going to leverage CMDB as our source of truth. That's what we do in the Champion application, is where we can get that source of truth from the authorized CIs that we can take more immediate action, even doing callbacks into BigFix. So what these type of integrations do, obviously allows your ServiceNow folks to create applications inside of ServiceNow that can leverage that connectivity back to BigFix. As I said, creating your own baselines, initiating actions, doing reporting, setting patching parameters, all of these things that you may manually do today, you can actually do in ServiceNow workflows. A couple quick things to note: in the companies of various sizes, if scaling is an issue, you can always add another mid server. Not a problem, cheap cost, it's just a VMware and a setup. And another thing to note for those people that are wondering about the CMDB, as we do integrations, we do these in separate tables. We do not, by default, update your CIs at all. We'd simply make a relationship with them. So the great idea here is we're not going to bother your CIs. We can augment the data there simply by creating relationships to the tables that we create. So with that, let's get down to action, and I'm going to walk over the lab guidebook and show you exactly what we did at that mastery class in Orlando. So let's get going. So hopefully you have a copy of your lab book open. This is exactly what we presented at the masteries class. And actually, the person doing the integration at the time of the class was actually Frank Hansen. We did start with some intro pre-steps. So of course, you do have to have ServiceNow. You can always get a free developer's edition free of cost. You do have to have your mid server set up. During this exercise that we're going to walk through, we're going to integrate it to BigFix, and we're going to be calling an example of using the computer ID. So I suggest you open up your notepad, go to your BigFix console, get a copy of one of your computer name's user ID, just so we can use that as an example, copy that into Notepad. And then also, as you're following along, this part here, when we do the integration, we're going to use this here, so you can copy this into Notepad again. This is a stringify. It allows us to output what comes across from that JSON XML thing, so we can actually see it in the script debugger. So we use that during our practicing in the JavaScript debugger just to make sure things are working right. And again, make sure your mid server is up and working in your lab. And from there, we're going to walk directly into exercise 1, where we do some best practices. Again, remember, this was about an hour and 15-minute integration class, so we don't cover everything, but we're going to at least get you going. So in this exercise, of course, we want to open up the ServiceNow Studio. So if you don't have it already, you can log into the Studio, hit the Filter Navigator button, and just type in Studio. What that's going to do is allow us to create a new ServiceNow application by Create Application button. So this is the process of beginning to create a scoped application inside of ServiceNow. So we're not just doing some scripted inputs integration into ServiceNow. We're actually going to do it the correct way. Once that comes up, you're going to notice you're going to hit Create. We're going to start from scratch and start creating our application. And if you notice here, once we create our application, you can call it whatever you like. However, if you follow what we have in this lab guidebook, some of the scripts and things we give you, it'll just work. Again, if you change the name of tables and IDs and all that, you're just going to have to adjust some of the scripts that we give you. So I am actually going to do that now in my browser. So I have ServiceNow up. Actually, that's our, let me get past that one. We're going to go into the lab environment. So just like we started, we type Studio. Oops, if I actually can spell correctly, this would be even awesome. You click Studio, it's going to launch a new tab. We're going to come right to Create an Application. Just like our document said, we're going to create this from scratch. We're going to hit Create. And again, if we follow our Word document here, we're going to follow it BigFix Data MC. MC was for master class. So BigFix Data MD. And I'm okay, so in this case, I did have to change it. I changed it to BigFix Dan MC just because our lab environment, I just need to clean a few things up in there. So at this point, if you notice, I'm going to switch to the application. That will now switch. This is exactly what you should see, just like we see it in the Word documentation. Now, optionally, for source control, we recommend this. You don't have to do it. It was optional in the lab. If you don't have a code repository, we're just showing you how you can actually put stuff to GitHub or your own control repository, just so that you can import stuff in and outside of ServiceNow afterwards. But that was optional. So the next thing that we want to do, we must create a table in ServiceNow and associated some columns for what we're going to do in this exercise, right? So again, as I noted or said in the beginning, we don't modify by default the CIs that are in your CMDB. We create our own set of tables. That way, if we want to remove this, take them out, change it, it does not in any way affect the current CMDB. So what we're going to do is follow these directions. Inside of here, I'm going to come up and say, click Application. From the data model, I'm going to pick a table, exactly like it's showing us here in the document is exactly what I'm doing. So I am going to hit Create, and then we're going to be able to create a new table from here. We're going to give it a label, and BigFix Dan Computers, and if I could spell, it'd be awesome. You can hit the tab button. It's going to go down, and if you notice, this is exactly what we have in our document here, and we're just going to simply hit Create, and we're going to notice that it's going to create all these things just like we did in the guidebook. So we're going to hit Submit, and then that will then create our table inside of ServiceNow. Now notice while we're doing this, because we're using the Studio, notice it's already starting to build out an application inside of ServiceNow. This is exactly what we want because these are some of the best practices. So again, if I switch back to our guidebook, we can see exactly what we're looking at here. Now what we want to do is we want to create some fields that we're going to grab some BigFix data. Notice right here it's saying click in the insert row. Following right along this example, we're going to create three things. correlation ID, ID, and last report time. And we're going to make them each a string. So if I scroll down here, and I can insert a new row. Oops, you got to click it twice. Correlation ID. You can hit this guy here. The type, if you start typing in here, we got double click, type string, say yes, that's what I want. Insert a no. We're going to say last report time. Hit the OK button, double click over here. This is also going to be a string. If I spell it right, again, having trouble spelling what I'm trying to do. And the last thing here, oh yeah, we just want ID. We're going to get the computer ID. And again, we're going to call this a string. You may notice that last report time from BigFix side, it comes in as a date. We're storing it as a string just because it's easier. When you start doing dates in ServiceNow, depending on the format, how the format's used, it can be a little bit tricky. So we chose to get that as a string, and we can always manipulate that later. So again, if I look at my documentation, I basically got it just like I did here. Correlation ID string. Actually, I spelt this wrong. So before we finish this, just make sure I spell that. Correlation ID. Okay. Now again, following our documentation, once you have created your fields like that, we should be have that a table. Once we created the 3 columns, we click the update button, and we have our new table with properties. So there's a couple ways to store this. You can come up here and hit the hamburger table, and we can hit save. So one of the ways to do it, we like doing it this way, and I'll tell you why. Because it doesn't take us away from this. Sometimes in ServiceNow, if you hit submit, it'll submit the request, put it in, and it kind of changes your view, if you will. So we don't want to do that. Now again, if we notice in our book, we're telling you to grab the scope name. We're going to use that later. So I'm going to follow the directions, come in here, double click this, say copy it. And again, I'm going to put this into my notepad, just like I should have been doing some of those other pieces and parts. I got that in my notepad. And as I mentioned, and I should have done it before, which I didn't, and I should follow along. Let me just scroll back up here. Remember, I told you to also put this into your notepad. It's going to make it a little bit easier for me later. So I'm going to put that in my notepad just so I have it. And we're going to scroll back to where we were. So again, we created our table, we put in our 3 fields, we copied and pasted the name of the scope of this table. We're going to use that a little bit later. And lastly, we'll also need the name of the application in the scopes. So to get this information in the Studio, we can click on menu, settings, and then copy the scope into Notepad as well. So let's go do that as well. So now, say File. We go to settings. It's going to show us our application settings. It's our name. And if you notice, our scope is right here. We're going to copy that. And we're also going to put that into our notepad. Again, this is just good when we get into the Java scriptlet debugger. This information is going to be helpful for us. So we're just telling you to copy that into your notepad at the moment. And that's really all we can do. Now we can close these out. We don't need them at the moment. And now what we're going to do is, again, keep scrolling down, and we're going to go right down to exercise 3, where we start testing our waters. So we'll follow this exercise 3 in just one moment. So let's continue with exercise 3. We're going to come up under the create application, just like the document tells us. In our filter, we can type REST for the RESTful message, outbound integrations. We're going to select that. Again, just validate that's exactly what we see in our document. We're going to hit create. So let's go off and do that real quick. Hit the create button. It's going to start and give us this method that we're going to create as a REST message. Now again, by following this documentation, we're going to call this BigFix requests and descriptions. You can really type just about anything you want in there. So let's go back in here and say, okay, this is the start of our BigFix requests and testing the BigFix API And for your endpoint, again, if we notice in our documentation, you got to go to your BigFix server on site. Ours is stcbfo2:52311/API. Okay, so that's what I'm going to type in here. So https://stcbfo2:52311/API. And again, go back to my documentation here. And that's exactly what we're doing here. And then we can submit this in. So again, if we notice, fill out the name, BigFix request, endpoint, it's your server at the API. And then we're going to hit the hamburger menu and save. And again, by doing it on the hamburger menu, this is going to allow, it's not going to leave this screen, right? So that's exactly what I want. So at the moment, our screen should pretty much look like just what we have here at this side. So we can continue to go now, and then we can create a new method, which we'll do right now. So we can come in and create a new method on the screen that we have. We're going to call this BigFix generic HTTP requests. So just to make it easier on my life, because I don't like typing, I'm going to hold this. I'm going to click this, and if we notice, if we go down here, we get a default get, which we got from here. And now I'm going to say new. It'll let me create a new method. And this is under the BigFix requests. The method is a get, just like we see from here. We still have to turn on our endpoint side of it for API/computers. So our endpoint again is https://stcbfo2:52311/API let's make sure I follow this exactly, API/computers. I thought so. Computers. So again, we want to type it in just like we have it here. Of course, you got to put in your service. And for our authentication, we are going to set this to basic. Okay, so we come back into here, we have it. If you notice authenticate, we could have set our authentication to basic at the top. It's actually probably a better way to do it, but we're going to keep our scopes per thing that we create. So in this case, we're going to create basic and a basic auth profile. Now, in my example, we already have this created. I'm going to show you in the documentation. It's very easy to do. I already have it created, so I'm not going to repeat this step. So I can pick the BigFix login here from this side of it. But I do want to show you, if we walk through the documentation, it's going to show you, you're not going to have your login profile. So when you click basic auth, nothing should show up. You can create a new auth. A pop-up like this one below will show up. Again, I called it BigFix login. This is where you're going to type your BigFix administrator. I'm using the admin account and password here. You obviously have to have credentials to log in. You can submit that. And then if you notice, what you'll have is exactly what I have in the back of my system right now, where I have the BigFix generic requests. I have the proper API that I want to point to, my proper BigFix server. Authentication type is basic. And now that you should have your basic auth profile created in yours. Now, the last thing we need to do is we also have to set which mid server this API connection is going to use, because you can have multiple mid servers in your environment. So we're telling you switch over to the HTTP request tab, and down in here we have to pick your mid server. So let me go do that right now. So I'm here, I've got the basic login. It's this button right here, BigFix request, and I am going to point it to my mid server because it obviously knows what my mid server is. So again, come into the hamburger menu, I can come in here and hit the save. So now I created that RESTful message inside of the system. Now at this point, we want to test, right? So here is where we're going to possibly move over to the Java debugger and test some of this stuff. So just like I'm showing you here, you can go down to the test button and we should get some output like this. Let's see if we made it work in our environment here. So if I come down to here, I can hit the test button. It's now going to call back up to the ServiceNow cloud, pass through the mid server, and lo and behold, I am now talking to BigFix in my lab environment from ServiceNow. And let's pat yourselves on the back because congratulations, you've created the initial REST integration between BigFix and ServiceNow. And at this point, we can close out the browser tab before we get to the next tab. So take a quick pause as we get in, and we're going to show you how to play with the JavaScript debugger in just one moment. So here we are in exercise 4. Again, we're going to play in the JavaScript debugger. So we're going to switch back over to ServiceNow into the Studio. I know I told you to close the tabs. That's okay if you didn't, but I'm just going to kind of walk through something. We're going to look on our navigator left side, and I'm going to show you that obviously in ServiceNow it started building out stuff for us automatically and creating that scoped application. And what we're going to do is we're going to pick our BigFix HTTP request and we're going to preview the script. Okay, why we're going to do that, it should bring up a window like this. We're going to copy this and then we're going to move off into the script debugger. So let's just do that step real quick. So if you notice back in the Studio, if you notice, I'm coming down here. Notice there's our table that we created back in step 2. We started creating some roles and access controls. So this is really cool. Again, ServiceNow is building out our application, our menu, our modules. And if you notice our REST request messages right here, right? So our outbound integration. So if I click this, it's going to bring up my window here and show me the REST messages that we created, our default get, our generic get. So as I said, we're going to click the generic get. Showing us what we created just a few moments ago. Again, scrolling down like we did before, instead of clicking test, what we're going to do is preview the script language. This is kind of nice because it kind of shows us, well, this is the code that was actually created. So we're going to copy this code. Just select it, right click, copy. Do it this way, either way you want, just like we're following the Word document. And in the Word document next, what we're going to do is show you some cool practices for using the script debugger. So we use this a lot, make sure things work in the BigFix realm, just like using the Fixlet debugger. You test things in there, make sure it works before you create a Fixlet and task, right? Just makes sense. So let's follow that. So we copy this right here. We're in the Studio. I'm going to click back over here to the ServiceNow tab, right? I already have the JavaScript debugger up, but if you did not, you can type background and notice, boom, scripts background. If you click it, JavaScript debugger, and I'm simply going to paste exactly what was in that preview script on the other tab into here. Notice there's going to be a lot of things commented out. That's for an advanced stuff. This should work. And if we go back to our Word document, we're going to tell you to go run this. So, well, let's go look. Let's run it, see what happens. We're going to, oops, let me click that again. We're going to run our script and let's see what happens here. Bada boom. So it actually worked. Don't worry about this usage analytics failed. We didn't set up analytics. You can ignore that. But notice that we were granted access to the application. The first time we run it, it grants me access in here. I'm the admin, gave me rights to view the table. But I really don't see any output. Well, why is that? Well, let's go right back to our Word document and figure it out. Okay, this code worked, but we didn't see anything. Well, the reason is the response body that comes back from BigFix has some JSON and XML. So kind of what we have to do is parse that. So remember, up at the beginning, I told you to copy this into your notepad, or we added it here again. So we can copy this. What I want us to do is we can click the back button here. And at the end of my script, I'm just simply going to paste that in place. Again, good for testing. Let's run script again and see what we see. Bada boom. What did we get? This long line here. I'm going to highlight it. And again, it's going to scroll off because it took that JSON back and it's giving us that XML in a really long line. If you have a lot of endpoints in your environment, the line is going to be incredibly long. So we are getting the data back from the JSON, from the message body, using that justify. Now we're going to show you and give you some code that's going to help you parse this XML. Okay, so far so good. But just real quick, we did throw this in here. And again, this is not part of the class, but we took this right off the IBM website just to show you, hey, what does some of the XML output look like when you're talking to the API? And really what we got back is some of this stuff right here, right? What I have highlighted here for each computer ID. Boom, just like this, computer, the resource of the computer ID, the last report time ends it, and it does that for all your machines. The other one we threw in here because we're going to be working with it is if we actually call the API/computer/ the BigFix Computer ID, it would bring back the default info from BigFix about a particular computer. So at this point, we took a little break during class. We encourage people, hey, go create a couple more of those REST messages and grab some other piece of data if you'd wanted to, like OS, CPU, we got last report time, but some of this other information. So again, came back from our 5-minute break, and as we could see from our example, we brought data back, but if you notice, hey, now we have to do some XML parsing of this data. So we said, well, listen, click the back browser button on the browser back button and copy the following code into the scriptlet debugger. So I'm just going to copy this right from this Word document, copy this, do exactly what our document said, hit the browser back button. There's my output there. I'm going to paste this right in. So we're giving you that code to deal with. Okay, so that adds the method to parse data. Next, we will add a method to process some of this data. So this is parsing XML to a document. So again, what I'm going to do is copy all of this, just like our example says. And it says, hey, put this in this script debugger after the last one and run it again. And we should get something that's parsed out a little nicer. Well, fair enough. Let's see if this works. I'm going to paste this in here. I'm going to run this script again. And bada boom, just like we said, we got that long line up here. That's from our first one-liner that we copied into the code. And those other two pieces of code we gave you are allowing us to open up that JSON and actually parse the XML. And again, you can take a look at that script, pull it apart a little bit, do other things that you want to do to it. But so far, so good in our example and exercise at this point. So that was just showing you how we can start testing and doing stuff in the script debugger. So again, we were trying to get people, hey, these are the tools that you can use inside of ServiceNow. You do want to leverage them. Again, we're covering this from a very high level, but it should get you going. It is best practices. We do like doing things in the script debugger first, and then what we're going to do is pick up those scripts and move it into the ServiceNow Studio. So at this point, we're going to create a script, fixed script inside of ServiceNow. Now, be honest with you, in our girder, our application, we actually do include scripts. It's a little more efficient, but that would have taken a little more time in explaining how to do that. So we created a fixed script just for the sake of brevity, because we only had about 60 minutes, as I said, or 90 minutes in that class. So again, exercise 5, we're going to go back to the studio. We're going to click the create application. We're going to go right down to server development, and we're going to click fix script and hit create. So let me go do that now. Actually, let me hit my back button here real quick, because one of the things we could do is grab all of this, but back into Studio, close down this I did a minute ago, follow along, create application. We're going to go into the server development. We're going to say fix script. We're going to hit create. Bada boom, we're right here just like we were in our Word document. Now what we're going to do is we're going to give this a name of BigFix Parser. So again, because I'm lazy, I'm going to copy this right out of the guidebook here and copy that into the name of the script. And then we're going to copy, we gave you everything here, okay, that you can pop right into the machine. Notice what's in green is a comment, and what's in yellow is the pieces you have to change. You need to change your scope, and you're going to need to come down here and change the table that you created. So I've done this a couple times. I had to change the name of my table each time, so we'll see how well this works for me. So I'm going to go back into here. Yes, I'm going to call this BigFix Parser. I'm going to hit the tab, parse BigFix computer data. Okay, and then here's my script. What I'm going to do now, again, is going back into the notepad, and I'm going to copy everything. Make sure we get it all. Make sure we don't lose a bracket or anything inside of here. Copy that, come up to here, and I'm going to paste it in. Okay, so one of the things, FYI, unexpected, this happened to us in class. It took us a minute to figure it out. Because we had a Word document, it was doing smart quotes. Don't we all hate smart quotes? Bada bing. So you may have to fix that. Happened in class as well. Word threw smart quotes into the stupid thing. So that was kind of annoying as heck. Okay, so the other thing to note, remember in Notepad, I had you copy a few things. For example, I had us copy our scope, right? And our table that we had. So my table is actually called this right here, right? So I'm going to copy that, and right here, which was in yellow a moment ago, I am going to change it to the table, the new table I created. So again, you're going to probably have to do that. And up here as well, which is no longer in yellow, but still got my comment here. Hey, change this to what my generic big request was, right? So again, following the Word document, I just changed the table that we're pointing it to, but we also want to change the scope as well. So I did call it BigFix request, but my scope in this case, because I created the new one, was actually called this. So I'm going to copy this part of it and right up to that dot, because I do believe my table name is the same, and I'm simply going to pop this in. Again, this is just because my table names of what I created in here was a little different. So I made those updates just like our document asked you to do, so it shouldn't be too hard for you to follow. And then we're going to save this. Okay, this is kind of what it looks like. So now we can submit this. Again, make sure you changed your updates, the stuff marked in yellow, and we can proceed. And we're not going to proceed in background. We're going to proceed it so we can actually see it run. So one of the things I also noticed, just FYI, I noticed in our document here, and I remember doing it, if you notice right in here, I said last reported time. However, if I go back up here to my table, just because I know I did this wrong a minute ago, notice here my table I said last report time. So a couple things I can do. I can either edit this, the last report time. Boop. It's got to match the script, of course, right? So column label, column name, again, I can't actually change the column name once I had it. So I'm going to have to change it in the script. This is actually my column name. I just happened to catch that as I was, close that one out. Close this out. And in my script here, you noticed I had reported. So again, just because I made that typo, I didn't type reported. You got to make sure your table fields match what we want to throw in here. Okay. So I'm going to hit submit on this. Okay. So it submitted it and saved it, and we're going to run the script. But before I do that, just real quick, I'm going to go into my table. Here's the table I have. I'm going to scroll down here, and I'm going to say, hey, show me the list. What is in this table at the moment? And again, at the moment, there's nothing in here. Our goal here, once we run this fixed script, it is going to take that data from our REST API command that we just tested to fix it debugger, and it's going to populate this table. So let's see if I typed everything out correctly. And boop, looks like I had an error. So it looks like I did screw something up, I believe. Let's go take a look, because if I go into my computers table and again come down here and I say show list, yes, it is still. So I did still screw something up. Let me go take a look at this and we'll figure out what I did wrong. Okay, I paused for a second. I see it again, just because I had to change the name of my tables and stuff. If you notice, my REST message has an S, BigFix requests. I don't have an S here, so put my S in there. Hopefully this fixes it. Let's do a quick save there. And at this point, let me just check a few things again, make sure I think I have everything that we were trying to get. So in here, you notice this is where we're writing to the table itself. So GR last report time, we're going to grab the computer ID. It's report time, computer ID. And for the correlation ID, which we have right here, I'm just going to make sure my table names, because I remember screwed up that field name a moment ago. And of course, look at that. I don't have it the same here. So here, I'm going to copy that. Again, sorry for this. It's just, obviously, I just made some typos when I was doing this. So I think that's everything. So we're going to run the script again and see what happens. Run script. We're going to hit proceed. And this looks better already. Bada bing. Again, don't worry about any usage analysis. We're not really doing it. It really only took about a second. No other failures beside the usage analytics. We just didn't set that up. We're going to close that. And now what I'm going to do is go back to my table. And let's see if that worked. We should actually see data in the table and did it with the bada bing. So look at this. We have our last report time. We have the computer ID, and I happen to set the correlation ID. More on that later, but tables in ServiceNow like to be indexed and correlated. Great way to do it with this computers is obviously by the computer ID because it's unique. Now, we populated a table inside of BigFix using our REST API, which was awesome. That's exactly what we got here. Okay, so we're going to give it a pause for just a second. So at this point, we have successfully updated our table inside of ServiceNow. One of the things we did next, I'm actually not going to do it in this video. You can certainly follow along in our document. We were just trying to show you, hey, how can you change the default form? ServiceNow created a form as we created our application. So all we really did is we started out like this with the correlation ID last report time. We kind of moved the correlation ID over. We don't really care to see it. We use that when we reference tables. And then we granted updated and updated by now. Shot it over there, hit saved. And that's basically what it looked like. So you can follow along with that. No need to make a big video of that. And then we just kind of relayed out the form, just trying to see how things looked, just to give you an idea of how that happens inside ServiceNow. Not a big deal. We did go and create a report afterwards. So we came down, creating a new application file, went to reporting, default report, right? We then had to type the BigFix computer table we wanted to use. Very simple to follow along. And in this one, very simply, we simply created a count report that just showed how many counts we had. This is all gearing up to create a dashboard, to be honest with you. At the Masteries class, we never quite got there, just ran out of time. So, and as extra credit, I had people go create a different type of bar chart and some other charts in their free time for a few minutes on break, just to give them an idea of how the reporting worked in ServiceNow. But what I am going to follow up with in video 2, this one's just getting a little long at this point, is, by the way, this is what we ended up with as a default dashboard, if you will, for BigFix. Just something real quick, easy, just giving you the stepping stones to get going. And once you do that, hopefully you can create something like we did at Champion, which is a full-fledged integration into the system. But one more snippet of code in the deep diving side, I am going to go record just because I think this is important, showing you how to iterate over computer IDs using a variable. So we're going to do that shortly in stage 2.